guys, and welcome to another review by ThinkerThemer. I'm Amy, i.e. the thinker. I'm all about mechanics, barely see the theme in a game. This is my wonderful fiance, Maggie, who is the themer in our relationship. She loves the story. In life, she loves the story.
Yeah.
She's
about theme in life.
She's the dreamer of the two of us. And so she approaches games completely differently to the way that I do. And together we are ThinkerThemer, and that's how we review games. Now, today, how excited are we to be reviewing Scythe? Scythe is a game that I'm sure everybody's heard of. It's ranked number 12 on BGG, and it has a lot of fans, and it's been around since I think 2016.
Yeah.
Actually, we were at Gen Con when it was released, and all I can remember is the line, and we were like, what is this line for?
Yeah.
And then
So much hype around it.
there was so much hype around this game, with good reason. The game is by Jamey Stegmaier of Stonemaier games, and Jamey is responsible for one of our favorite games of all time, Viticulture. It's the game that was really, even though we'd played other board games before, when we played Viticulture, it really was like the segue into becoming really obsessive about games and their mechanics, and we still play a lot of Viticulture. So Scythe, though, is one that we have just never kind of come across. None of our gaming groups owned it, and actually Jamey has kindly provided the game for this review because we were so keen to try it out. However, I will state completely transparently, we have not been paid for this review, so this is completely our authentic opinion about what's going on here. The other thing I want to mention is the incredible artwork in this game. The artist is Jakub Rozalski, and he was creating a world in paintings, I believe, called 1920 Plus. And Jamey contacted him at the early stages of that series of paintings, and together they kind of evolved that world into the game and the art that you'll see in this review. The other thing that I wanted to talk about just quickly before we get into the game, this is a really long preamble, but what you'll see in front of us is the base version of the game. We're using the small version of the board because there is a board extension, which we do have, but it's a big board to begin with, and you've got kind of player mats as well. And so even in a 5-player game, because of the size of the table that we were using, we were kind of using the small map, but it is nice to have that option to expand it, because the hexes that you see here on the board can get, are quite small. It can get crowded when there's a lot of players in the same area. The other thing that I wanted to note is that we are using the realistic resources, which are fabulous. There's just like the little oil barrels, the food in little bags, the heavy weight of the steel is all so gorgeous.
So
and
satisfying to play with.
So satisfying. We also have the metal coins here, and again, in this game, the metal coins are also your victory points. And so to have the metal version, it feels more special, I think, especially because they are the victory points. So
feels so meaty and solid.
It does. So
like the fruits of your labor throughout the game.
That's right, yeah. And actually I found like we were using the ones quite a lot to begin with, but because at the end you're tallying your score as well, you do need the bigger denominations. The other thing I'll point out about what you're going to be seeing on camera is the miniatures. I had so much fun painting these miniatures before we got it to the table, but I had to do a speed paint of these because Maggie was so keen to get it to the table.
Let's get it to the table. How to play it?
Let me play it.
Not yet.
I'm like, not yet. We have to paint the minis. But also we were trying to get in a 2-player game and to learn the game prior to a games night where we wanted to bring Scythe along with us. So I was under so much pressure to paint these minis, but because of that, I kind of worked out a speed painting method for the mechs that gives like a really great pop to them, so much better than the plastic out of the box. And it really didn't take me that long at all. I'm not an expert painter by any means. I've only been doing it for a little while. So if anyone's interested in that, please mention in the comments, and I'm happy to share that kind of speed painting method. But with all that out of the way, let's talk about the game.
So Scythe takes place in this alternative history in the 1920s, post-war. I think one of the things that almost kept us away from Scythe was the theme, because we're not usually into war, we're not into battle, we're not into combat. And from looking at the cover art and sort of hearing a little bit about the world, that's what I assumed this would be. In fact, this is actually more, it's not really so much about war, it's that post-war, you are different factions and you're trying to kind of gain influence, build up your buildings, your resources, and your power, essentially, to be able to be the one dominating or be the most powerful by the end of the game. One other thing that I need to say is, for this world to come to life, it really helps to have an Amy in your house who can like take over the painting of the miniatures. That painting work really makes them pop and just completely changes the table presence of this game.
That was the most satisfying element, actually, of painting them, was when we opened up the box for our 5 players and they got to choose their character and the associated mechs that, you know, had people excited from the beginning. So now let's talk about how you actually play the game. When you look at the board, it looks like a battle zone. It looks like pure area control, but actually the game is much more nuanced than that, and it's much more similar to a classic dry Euro than it is to an Ameritrash kind of battling game. So it's a little bit misleading in that way, and it was much easier for us to learn as heavy Euro gamers than we thought it would be. In fact, there's some really familiar mechanics here. The main way that you take actions on the board is through worker placement. And instead of competing for worker placement spots, everybody has their own individual player board in front of them, which has 4 spaces for your single worker. And your single worker can take any one of those 4 actions, with only one caveat, that you can't play the same action twice. So in subsequent turns, you have to be moving your worker around on these spaces, except for one faction which has that as an ability, but for the most part you can't do the same action twice. So what are the actions that you can take? Basically, I'm not going to run through all of them, but essentially you are generating resources, you're improving your military power, and you are building buildings, and you're able to actually upgrade the actions that you can take on your board. If you've ever played Great Western Trail, it's similar in that the player board, you are revealing additional benefits, or you're helping to lower costs of certain actions by upgrading your board, by removing these little cubes that reveal greater abilities. And the reason why the map comes into play is that you can only generate resources where you have workers on spaces. At the top of each of these spaces, you can see that they're associated with different resource elements. And of course, to build buildings or to get anything done in this game, you need to have resources. And so when you are generating resources, you have to have a little worker on that space that allows you to activate and gain those resources. When you gain those resources, they actually go onto the hex where they're being generated. And that's where this game becomes interesting, because you have complete control over your worker placement, but your resources are kind of left out.
Yeah, you're vulnerable.
Yeah, you're really vulnerable, because your resources are only protected by your military power on the board. In other words, other people can come up to you and battle you on a hex on the board and essentially steal your resources.
Yeah, send you home and keep the goods.
Yeah, so that is the main reason that you would ever battle someone, is to either take control of an area, because there are some valuable areas on the board, or to steal their resources. But having said that, the combat in this game is extremely downplayed. I would say that in the games that we have played, there's only probably, you'll only battle 1, 2, 3 times across the whole game. And that's because what this game really is all about is it's an efficiency puzzle. It is absolutely a race to have the most efficient way of getting to the objectives. And the objectives in this game are very clearly laid out in the top of the board here. And as you're achieving each of those objectives, you're placing a star, and the scoring conditions in this game are super simple, because there are only 3 things that get scored at the end of the game. The first is how many of those objectives you've completed. The second is where you have control in the area control battle on the board. And the third is for every pair of leftover resources you have, you will also get points. But the trick to that is there's a multiplier, and the multiplier is your popularity track. And so the higher that you can be up on that track, the more it's going to multiply out those other 3 things. Now, what's interesting about that is popularity, or the multiplier, the scoring multiplier, is actually really hard to come by in this game. And if you move around too much and you're scaring off other people's meeples, you actually lose popularity. So,
which makes thematic sense.
It does make thematic sense, but there's an interesting tension in this game between like achieving your objectives efficiently and moving around the map and interacting with other players that I just feel is actually really unique and intriguing. There's actually a lot of reasons not to engage with players on the board, but at the same time, you need to be moving around the board in order to pick up resources. So there's a lot to think about in this game. So on the board, each player, and Maggie's set up a nice 5-player game here. Obviously, there's only 2 of us here. We have played this game at 2-player and the full 5-player count. But this is a good example of just showing the variety of pieces that are in the board. So obviously, everybody has 4 mechs. And mechs can be brought out really to help with your military power, because only your mechs and your individual player are able to battle other players. But then you also have all of these cute little wooden meeples, and the meeples are required to help you generate resources and move around the map. And all of your characters can help you with the area control part of the game. Now, if you do battle another player, all that's happening when you lose is that your player, your mech or your player has to go back to your starting point. That is really all that happens when you lose a battle. So it's not terrible, aside from if they steal your resources, which is a whole other thing. But if they steal your resources and you go back to your starting point, it does set you back a few turns, because it's harder then to get out again, because you can't actually move very quickly around the board. But other than that, the conflict is not huge in this game.
No. So let's talk from a theme point of view. So obviously the 1920 plus world that has been created, this alternative history that sort of, you've got these huge fighting machines and the mechs, like that is quite cool. Ironically, it's not the kind of thing that we're usually into. So it was one of the barriers of entry for us to begin with. But when you're looking at the board, I think the thing thematically that really brings it across are the actual characters, and obviously your player, your individual faction mats, and the mechs, and that side of things. The other thing that happens is you are, as part of walking around and discovering new territories, you're going to be coming across these encounter points or territories, where you will be able to get one of these if your character, say,
and if you're first.
And if you're the first to discover that area, your character is landing in that spot, you get that token, and then you get to access one of these encounter cards. This is probably the most thematic element in, I would say personally, for me, in the whole game, because you have this, you've kind of ventured into this area, and there's a little, almost like 3 options how you can interact with the locals. What I like about this is usually there's a fairly straightforward, neutral option. There's usually like an altruistic or a kinder one, where you're kind of helping the locals or doing something nice with the locals. And then there's just like the do you have to be such a bastard type option, which is quite nice. And the artwork itself is quite beautiful.
Yeah, I found them quite funny, some of the encounter cards. The so really mean option.
Yeah, exactly. I found that I rarely took that.
Yeah, because it hurts your popularity to do mean things in the game.
Which is another interesting thing for a game that is in that kind of post-war area. So much of it is about like having your popularity go up. So you're actually quite mindful of not damaging that or doing too nasty things. Aside from that, one of the things that I find is like, I don't, like from an immersive experience, and again, I don't know if this is because like thematically, this is not the type of world that I love going into. I actually found that I don't feel, as I'm moving the components around, I don't feel like I'm in this world. I kind of feel more like I'm in a strategy mindset. Like my head is more in a how do I optimize my objective. So it's more like, you know, I'm sitting back strategizing in some room somewhere else rather than like I'm out there, you know, playing with with my workers or interacting with them. Aside from that encounter card, which is the only time where I feel like that thematic, I'm in that world. So what did I think about the game overall? So my overall experience of it. I think I'm going to talk about viticulture a little bit because I want to kind of compare it to it, partly because all the wooden components remind me of viticulture. This is essentially a mega cellar. You've got also like your little areas here that reminds me of that. You even have a windmill, which is very similar. Even though the placement of the buildings, I kind of wish that there were more of them or they did more exciting things. That's not really an element that I'm like super thrilled about. In viticulture, actually, it's a very linear experience. Whereas here, and it kind of feels like even though you can try a lot of different strategies in viticulture, you're all kind of ultimately trying to do the same thing. You're getting the grapes, you're producing the wine, and you're getting the points from those, a combination of those things. In here, it's so varied. So even though to learn the game was relatively easy in that if you've got a group of gamers, they'll be able to pick it up. And that was our experience playing with our gamer friends. Definitely. They were able to fairly easily pick it up. And it's not like, oh, what does this do again? And even with the individual faction powers, that's pretty straightforward. But then the options in terms of when you're looking at strategy and going, okay, what am I going to focus on next? Because there's so many different objectives and so many different ways that you can go, that bit can be a bit overwhelming. But I actually found it quite intriguing. So the analogy that I would use is like if you're single and you're like out looking for a potential match, you know, and you're kind of dating and like, you know, looking around, and then you see someone that's like, oh, they're not usually my, you know, that's not usually my type. This theme is not usually this theme is not usually my type, but it's intriguing, and you know they look mysterious, and I want to get to know them. And then when you start to get to know them, you go, actually, they're not at all what I thought it was. It's not a war game. It's not a combat fighting conflict type game. It's very Euro-ish in the sense of like it's about resource management. It can be a bit fiddly in that sense. As a solo gamer, I love that. You probably not so much. There's a lot of like building your strategy, exploring different strategies, trying completely different things every game. The game even comes with a scorecard where you're kind of tracking the first game where this happens, or the first player that manages to achieve this.
That's cute.
Like so that gives you like the replayability of it is so great. And I always felt like viticulture was very like replayable, but this feels like this is like 10 or 20 viticultures in terms of the different avenues that you can lose yourself and paths that you can lose yourself down. As an introduction, I would still go, if you've got new gamers, go to viticulture, because it's kind of like, it's a much more appealing theme and sort of easier to like go linearly. But overall, I'm really looking forward to learning more and more about how each individual faction works and like what's the strategy with each faction and how do you optimize that efficiency game of those objectives.
I have a slightly different opinion. I was just letting Maggie talk about her opinion.
Ramble on.
I think we come at, you know, obviously we come at games very differently. But there's an element of this game that is just absolutely not my style. Which is the fact that it is essentially multiplayer solitaire. As in the board makes it look extremely interactive, but as I mentioned, there are a few reasons to battle. You don't battle too much in the game, and actually it can set you back on your other objectives if you are battling a lot and that multiplier. So for me, it didn't make sense to engage a lot with the other players. And in fact, in our last game, I won with doing very little on the map, and everybody else was battling each other, collecting resources, stealing things.
And she was just like,
and I was just like, I was quite trapped because of my player ability meant I couldn't really move around easily. And so, but I won. And that's because to me, the efficiency puzzle is extremely clear.
Yeah.
So Maggie...
Well, not for me.
Yeah. So Maggie speaks about like all of the different possible things that you can get done. And for me, it's like a race to do everything you need to do to achieve those objectives. My eye is always on those objectives and like how quickly I can achieve them. And so for me, it felt like such a solo experience, even when I was playing with 4 other people, because I was just doing my own thing on my worker placement board and trying to kind of puzzle out the best path forward. And now it isn't linear like viticulture. In fact, there are many different ways that you can get to that end point. But for me, that is not difficult. That's how my brain is wired. Yeah. And I could very effectively work out from turn to turn what my best move was to get me closer to my goals. Now, Maggie really likes multiplayer solitaire. She's very happy to go about her business, doesn't often care what's going on around her. In fact, she, so many times in games, I'm like, Maggie, focus on what I'm doing. Don't you care about my move?
No, I need to focus on my moves.
And that's, she's a solo player, but also her head is so much in what's going on here. And for me, once I've worked out my most effective move, what I want to be thinking about is how people are going to block that move or stop me from that most efficient path. And in this game, I find that there's not a lot of messing with my strategy. So for me, I was kind of just like, oh yeah, I'm just going to play out my moves.
But can I say something to that?
Yeah.
I think that is also partly because of the caliber of players that you had.
I completely agree.
I think like stronger players, I'm saying like I wasn't very strong because again, I'm very focused. Stronger players that really have a good feel and grasp for the faction abilities and how you make the most out of that would really make you it would put a lot more pressure on
it would
trying
put
to
pressure
adapt
on my speed, but I don't think it would make me adapt my strategy very much because I think that the only way to mess with what I'm doing is really to engage with me on the map. And if you do that, it's of detriment to yourself. Yeah. So I think the game doesn't encourage a lot of interaction. I could see you could play a very aggressive game. I'm just not sure how quickly you'd be able to get to the objectives if you did so. And that multiplier effect as well, if you're moving around a lot on the board. I wanted to talk about the faction abilities actually, because Maggie made an interesting point that as you get to know the factions better, you can hone your strategy. For me, there's actually a combination of player board, so your actions you can take, which are all different, and your faction. So there's 2 variable boards and there's 5 of each of those. And so there's 25 different combinations that you could end up with. And for me, it's less about getting to know the factions, but more that is very much sets you up for your strategy for the entire game. So there is replayability built in there, as well as the fact that you start with an objective card, which I found heavily influenced what I did. And for me, it's not so much about how do you best leverage their ability, but it so much guides your strategy. So for me, fiddly resources, multiplayer solitaire, not my style of game. However, I want to caveat that with the fact that I would be more than happy to play this at any time. If you want me to beat you at an efficiency puzzle, I'm going to do it. But also, I really enjoyed, we've got a heavy gaming group and we introduced them to this game and I love seeing it through their eyes. And what became apparent to me in a 5-player game versus the 2-player game that we played is not only that there was more going on in the map and more engagement, obviously, is the wonderful game arc of this game. I really appreciate the fact that it starts slow. You are just doing one thing at a time. And it's very easy, therefore, for new players to get into it because you've got 4 choices and they, kind of give you different actions. But then as the game goes on, because you're upgrading those actions, you start to get a bit more traction. You start to be able to do multiple things with every action and you have the resources required to build things. And all of a sudden it really heats up towards the end of the game. And actually what surprised me about the 5-player games was that towards the end of the game, that thing happened where everyone's kind of on edge of their seat, leaning forward, looking at the map, working out how they can, because you can see the end game coming because it ends when anybody achieves 6 of the objectives. And so they could see it coming and everybody was like, how do I just scrape one more star or scrape my way up that popularity track to get a higher multiplier? So because the end game is so visible, I really enjoyed that about this game is the race at the very last finale. And I another thing that I love about this game actually is that the turns are very quick.
Yeah.
And I thought in a 5-player game actually it would get quite bogged down, but it was really rapid. Like before I even knew it, it was my turn again, and I was like, oh my god, I haven't thought about what I'm going to do next. So it was very, very fast. It's like turns go by very quickly, low downtime, which I really, really enjoyed. I just felt as though I didn't have enough investment in what other people were doing, aside from the fact of the end game. The end game was really where my mind was at. It's like, how soon is someone else going to end this? So yeah, for me, this is probably, there's a couple of elements here that won't, you know, and are really not my style, but then I feel like I was pretty good at it. So
yeah, we're great at it.
So
one of those,
I would never say no to a game of this.
So I absolutely love this game. Amy's on the fence, but she'll play it anytime it comes out. Will we keep it? Yes, absolutely, we will keep it. When will it come out? Any time that I can find an excuse to bring this out on the table, with particularly with our, well, actually solo. I'll play the solo gladly. I've got the app. I enjoy that as well. I haven't gotten into competitions, which I think is like, that is well beyond my skill level at this stage. But yeah, and even multiplayer, if we've got like, our gaming group and they're keen for it, I will play it.
Yeah, I think that the enjoyment that I saw in other people's eyes playing this game will mean that they will ask us to get it out again. And so yeah, absolutely, it will stay in our collection.
Yeah. So that's a review of Scythe. If you enjoy board game reviews, or if you like what we've got, feel free to subscribe. Make sure that you hit that notifications bell so that you're informed whenever we release any new videos. Hit like if you like this video. Also let us know in the comments, have you played Scythe? What's your experience of it? What do you like? What do you not like? Are there any particular... We haven't even gotten into expansions yet, so that's going to be the whole new world to
actually,
explore.
if you've played an expansion, I would be very interested to know, aside from the fact that I want to paint all the minis, I'd be very interested to know if there's any expansions that increase the player interaction. So please let us know in the comments.
Yeah. So that's it for us, and bye for now.
Bye for now.